Hello and welcome to this, the first in a series of 3 short videos designed to introduce you to the Breaking the Mold philosophy and some of the practical aspects of its implementation. A few years ago, I came across the story of a man who worked for Ford US. He was a production line worker and he worked there for 35 years before he retired. When he retired, he was quoted as saying, "For 35 years, Ford have paid me to use my hands. For no extra money, I could have used my mind." What he's trying to say is that in all of that time, his experience, his intelligence, his imagination were never used, even though they came to work with him every day. He knew that he was more valuable than Ford could ever imagine. But that's not the real story. He was one of thousands of production line workers. His feelings of hopelessness, his feeling of wasted potential has got to be reflected in every single one of those other production line workers, because of the way that they were all treated by the management at Ford. Ford paid to use their hands and backs without for one instant realizing that those hands and backs were attached to minds, and that those minds were equally as valuable, if not more valuable, than the hands and the backs that Ford believed they had purchased. Now, on this planet, there are more than 6 billion people. Of those, more than 1 billion are managed by other people. It's the experience and the potential that's locked inside the heads of those 1 billion people that we are trying to release. 1 billion times 35 years is an awful lot of wasted potential. We understand that in almost every workforce on this planet there exists this same potential, and that unless we as managers do something different, that's exactly where that potential is going to stay, locked firmly away inside the heads of the workforces. Breaking the Mold deliberately sets out to release that potential, and it releases that potential by engaging the workforce. The deliverable of Breaking the Mold is engagement. Everything we do, every interaction with the workforce is designed to create the environment that allows them to engage. And we do this because an engaged workforce is happier and hugely more productive than a workforce that is not engaged. Now, one of the most powerful tools to allow a workforce to engage is the collection of their suggestions, of their ideas for improvement. Now, if we gave our Ford worker a suggestion box, it's very unlikely that he would have anything to do with it, because he was never allowed to engage. When he first started at Ford, he was as keen as mustard. He learnt from the experience of the people who were working alongside him, and very soon he would come up with ideas of his own of how to improve his performance. And he gave those ideas to management. Then reality struck, and he realized that nobody was listening to his ideas. Nobody was paying any attention. His suggestions for improvement were being ignored, and being ignored hurts. At this point, our Ford worker decided that in future, if he had any good ideas, he would keep them to himself. So effectively did he do that for the next 35 years, he never suggested one single improvement. Don't try and think of this as an interesting story. Try and think of it as the way that most managers manage today, by telling their workforces what to do and ignoring their suggestions. In 2010, in the wake of the Toyota scare in the US, I was doing some research. I was comparing the ways that Western cultures and Japanese cultures react to the suggestions that are delivered to them from their workforces. Masaki Imai's book, Kaizen, tells us that the Matsushita Electrical Corporation, which is National Panasonic to you and me, won a prize for the most suggestions from their workforce. They have about 200,000 workers, and those workers generated 6.3 million ideas. And that's not so much, that's about 31 ideas per worker. At the same time, Bob Nelson, in his book, Keeping Up in a Down Economy, tells that the average number of ideas that come from an American worker is 1.1 ideas per year. That is one single suggestion per North American worker per year. Now, these are statistics, and I'm sure you're as aware as I am of the difficulty of making assumptions from statistics. Generally, statistics are collected by people who want to reinforce the opinions that they represent. So we take them with a bit of a pinch of salt. But I used these statistics in an article that I wrote in 2010. And as a result of that article, I was contacted by a man who was working for Ford UK. He told me he was working on a site of 2,500 people. And he had an idea to improve his process. So he took that idea to the Human Resources Department because they were the people who had the only suggestion book. And he gave them that idea. He noticed that his idea was number 12 for the whole year. From a site of 2,500 people, his suggestion was the 12th. Now this to me means one of two things. One, Western workforces don't have any ideas to give. Two, Western ideas are as plentiful as the Japanese ideas, but there is something that is preventing them from being used. In the same way that the Ford worker was prevented from producing his suggestions because of the way that he was treated by his management. I know that the Western workforce is not stupid. So I have to side with the Ford worker and conclude that the absence of suggestions generated by the Western workforce must be the fault of the managers. This is supported by my own experience working in the North Sea. I was on a rig that had been operating for 25 years. In all of that 25 years, there was not one single record of a suggestion from the workforce being implemented. Not one. After a year, we had collected and implemented 408 separate ideas for improvement from a crew of 50. That is only 8 ideas per person per year. That's not a huge amount. Until we costed those ideas and realized that those ideas had saved the operator £3.9 million. That is 6.2 million Canadian dollars, or 27% of the annual operating cost of that oil rig. The irony of this situation was that most of those ideas had been submitted to management before I even arrived on the rig. But they were all ignored. Can you imagine how that feels? You've got an idea. You know it's worth money and you give it freely to management. And management ignore it. How dispiriting is that? How discouraging. That's the way that management made the workforce feel. The collection of suggestions has two effects. The first is that the workforce creates solutions to problems that management don't even know exist. Sydney Yoshida, a Japanese consultant, tells us that only 4% of an organization's problems are understood by senior management. 9% of an organization's problems are understood by middle management. But 100% of an organization's problems are understood by the workforce. By using these suggestions for improvement from the workforce, we create an immediate and measurable added value. The second and infinitely more powerful consequence of taking these suggestions from the workforce is the change in the way it makes the workforce feel. We do that by giving feedback for every single idea that is collected. And that feedback is only ever allowed to be one of two things. Yes, good idea, we're going to do that. No, bad idea, but here is the reason why not. This is feedback the crew have never had before. This is feedback that tells them someone's listening to them, someone is valuing them, someone is respecting them, someone is taking the time to acknowledge the value of their experience. It's this feedback that changes the way the workforce feel about what they do. This feedback allows them to be proud of what they do. This feedback allows them to engage. And engagement is our deliverable. Thank you for listening. The next short video will focus on the directive behavior of management that actually prevents the workforce from engaging. Thank you for listening.